This is a hood from a Farmall Cub, and it's being modified for use on a garden pulling tractor. And there's some features in it that we don't need. There's extra holes and everything, so we're going to delete them. We're going to shave this. We're going to get rid of the exhaust port and make this fit. Here's the hood shaved. So now let me show you how I accomplished it. One of the first things to do is to determine whether there's any shape in the panel. So we can use various radius gauges and fixtures to mimic and determine whether there's shape. As you can see, when they stamped it, it actually pulled down a little bit. We're touching over here, we're touching over there. So we're going to take a little bit larger area out of our cut, and we're going to make it straight all the way across. But other than that, checking it everywhere else, the panel is nice and flat this way. So the roll that it has is just a change in form. And we'll use different radius gauges to determine what we need to do. And we'll get that piece to the right form and before we start anything else. The same thing for these small holes. We'll take different radius gauges and we'll determine how much of a radius those parts have. And we'll get them to shape and get them to form first. Another initial step is to clean up some portions of the edge and determine our material thickness. So now we can take the material thickness, put it to the right form, and start making our blanks. Here we are, we had the blanks really close. Most of this can be just done with a hammer and dolly. There are other techniques. You could put a rubber band in an English wheel. Because it's only a change in form and not a change in shape, the rubber band will absorb part of the action of the English wheel and cause it to only change two-dimensionally in shape. Now this small little spot over here, I punched it out with the Whitney punch, and I made this little slug. You can see this one is right out of the punch, and then this one has been planished. And we can use those to fill in these small little spots like this. Now, you could maybe throw a piece of copper behind it and fill it in, but all welds shrink, and if you give it room to shrink, it's going to take that room. So by filling it, even with that little slug, it's going to make it a lot easier to finish. And here's the other one right here. And it's very close right now. So now I'll paint them with Dykem, or you can use a magic marker if you need to. And while that's drying, I'm going to cut this section out and start getting it cleaned up and ready. But for now, that's how I made those parts. So here's the English wheel set up with the rubber band, and I've just got a lower anvil that's very close to the radius that I needed in the part. And it's just a matter of, I don't have a lot of pressure, and I'm just using it like a rotary dolly, if you want to think of it that way, and just working it back and forth and giving it that little bit of radius. And the rubber band absorbs the three-dimensional shape change and just gives you a change in form. Change in forms are two-dimensional, changes in shape are three-dimensional. So I used my little saw to do the rough cut, to cut it out, and then I used my shears in order to do the final cut. Then the file just to clean everything up. And you notice I left radiuses. What I did is I drilled those corners. And the reason why I want these radiuses is because I'm going to try to weld this in one shot as best as I can. And I want that stress and I want that shrink to follow me. The stress and shrink don't like to make 90-degree turns, but if you give it a radius, it will follow you and it'll help keep your distortion to a minimum. And that'll just make the metal finishing a little bit easier. So now I'm going to file them a little bit more, get my lines a little more cleaned up, and then I'll start sanding it and getting ready to weld. Once the dicum and everything dries, we're going to come in and we're just going to scribe right on the edge of that line. Just clamp it in place just enough to hold it to where it's not going to move and it's in the right position. And then scribe it one time. Get a nice fine line to cut on. So with the shears, a lot of times people will hold them like this. And when I'm here, I got my elbow way up and it's like a chicken wing. But if you just rotate your shears upside down, it does the same thing. And what I'm more concerned about is which way do I want the waste to go? We sometimes think of shears being a left or right cut, but which way do I want the waste to go? So I want the waste to go on the right hand side and down. So me holding the shears like this will work fine. And I just want to come in here and I've rough cut to where I'm within 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and that puts it within the limits of my shears. So I'm going to come into this corner, and the bottom is my anvil and the top is my shear, and I'm just going to follow my line nice and pretty around. And by holding the shear the other way, I don't have a big old chicken wing hanging out. So every time that I go to open the shear, I'm going to slide forward. And that's how we keep from having those nasty little thorns that are going to bite us when we're done. We're just going to cut right on the edge of our scribe mark. If I get off a little bit, it's fine. I can true it up with the, I can either come back or I can true it up with a file afterwards. And that's all we're going to do. We're going to come just aiming the edge of that shear on the edge of that line. Maintaining contact with the anvil. And as I open the shear, I slide it forward and keep it in the cut. Here I got to reset a little bit. I always want to lean onto the anvil, not away from the anvil. Away from the anvil will spread the jaws and cause it to wear your shears and dull them. But if we got to lean, we lean onto the anvil. Cut right on our edge. By doing it like that, we've created a thorn-free, nice, clean edge. I can feel free to run my finger up and down it and not worry about thorns because that technique just works that well. So now I'll come in and like this spot right here, I'll hit that with the file and I'll clean it up to my edge, and then we'll match the part up to the where it goes. So here we are all tacked together. I was running about 50 amps, which is more than what I need to weld it, and I just flash tacked it to where I'm not using any filler, I'm just doing a fusion tack. And I've come in and I've planished it and got it fairly close. It's still a little bit low in some spots, but I'm going to planish it a little bit more, get it real close, and then weld it in. I'm just using a 16th tungsten, and I'm just getting it as close as I can, stepping on the pedal, watching it fuse, and then letting off. And just fusion. And that's how tight you want your joint. The more room there is for it to move, the more it's going to want to shrink and move. So I'll planish it one more time and then get ready to weld it. Here we are welded. I tried to keep a nice even heat affected zone. I did it with as few starts and stops as possible. And it's hard to see, but it has shrank and pulled it in a little bit. So now I'm going to start planishing it and bringing it back up and getting it into place. But that's it. As far as the back side goes, it's got 100% penetration and plenty of fill to bring it back up. So let me get to planishing it and we'll go from there. So now I'm taking my Vixen file, and as I planish it, I'm filing. And it's going to show me where all the highs are and what's still left low. And I'm just working this edge and bringing it up until my file just starts cutting it. And I'm going to start working down this way, doing the same thing. My file is skating on these parts that are still painted, and it's just cutting the top off the weld as I bring it up. And everything here has shrank in towards the weld like this. So by planishing it right on the weld, I can bring it back up and I can start to get the shape and the form right. There's a little bit of a spot. It's not bad. I'm probably going to leave it like that. I did overstretch it one little spot with as I was planishing it. And it's kind of my first time using it, but I used a Wolf Metal Fabrication shrinking disc. And I tell you, it did bring that high spot down very nicely. And it's just a little bit more work needs to be done, but I think I'm going to leave that there and just move on to the next spot. So there was a large one. Little ones here. Those are the two other spots. And then you still need a little bit of work, hammer and dolly, but they are really, really close.